The alleged assassin has been caught. The shocking new poll shows Democrats prefer socialism to capitalism. And the media has a racial double standard, which is surprising, if they have any standards. That and more on this week's America Uncovered headlines. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. And I just want to say thank you all for leaving an American flag emoji in the comments. It's been a huge help with engagement and YouTube's algorithm. And I have to be extra nice to the algorithm because, oh boy, it does not like what I've been covering this week. Also, great job blurring everyone's face, but the victim. Never change mainstream media. Or, change immediately. And speaking of, a quick update on the assassination of Charlie Kirk. May he rest in peace. The Wall Street Journal reports that ammunition used by the shooter was engraved with pro-transgender, anti-fascist messages. Because nothing says I hate fascism more than murdering someone you disagree with. It also had the button combination to summon a bomb in the game Helldivers 2, as well as if you read this, you're gay, LMAO. Damn it. On Thursday, the FBI released images of a person of interest in the shooting, followed later by some video of said person of interest running across the roof of the building he allegedly shot from, and even more images. They even offered a $100,000 reward for any information leading to his identification and arrest. And then Trump announced on Fox and Friends that the shooter was in custody.
I think with a high degree of certainty, we have him.
It is interesting that President Trump himself is the one announcing this, and also that it's happening on a talk show. Peak Trump. The alleged killer is Tyler Robinson, and he was turned in by his own father, a 27-year veteran of the local sheriff department. Wow, that's going to make for the most awkward Thanksgiving ever. Of course, it's not just an issue of who the killer is, but the ideology that radicalized him, peddled through the internet and American universities, that produces things like this. Which actually brings up a good question. Where is the version of Charlie Kirk for the left? The guy who goes to university campuses and debates anyone. I'm actually asking. I would love to watch that. But it seems that American students have more to worry about than just radical leftist ideology. We all know that American students fell way behind during the pandemic. Actually, given the state of the American education system, I shouldn't assume anyone knows anything. But thankfully, after years of schools being reopened and diligent efforts from politicians and educators, we can now proudly say, U.S. high school students have fallen even further behind in math and reading. Wow, who could have guessed that closing schools and playing a forever game of catch-up would have negative consequences? I understand that question is hard to answer, since you can barely hear it over the people who warned about this exact scenario screaming, "I told you so!" The National Assessment of Education Progress conducted its first review since the pandemic, and 12th graders' scores were the lowest in 20 years. On the bright side, Americans continuing a steady decline of not being able to do math might explain why a recent revision shows that 911,000 fewer jobs were created between April 2024 and March 2025 than initially reported. At first, I thought this was because the numbers were a lie to try and make the labor force look better than it was for political purposes. But now I'm starting to think they may have just been bad at math. I'd hate to take jobs away from Americans, but if we want a more accurate counter, we may have to import one, a skilled immigrant from Transylvania. The pandemic isn't the only reason U.S. students are losing ground, as test scores were falling years before the pandemic. At this point, it feels like it'd take a miracle to turn things around. Maybe that's why President Trump says the Department of Education will issue guidance about prayer in public schools.
The Department of Education will soon issue new guidance protecting the right to prayer in our public schools. For most of our country's history, the Bible was found in every classroom in the nation. Yet in many schools today, students are instead indoctrinated with anti-religious propaganda.
And what Bible would be better to bring back to U.S. schools than the God Bless the USA Bible, the only Bible endorsed by 45th and 47th President Donald Trump, and the only Bible with an apparel section on its website. Because how will anyone know you're a God-fearing American without an alligator Alcatraz t-shirt that I sincerely hope wasn't made in China? And if you're wondering, hey, wait a minute, handsome news anchor, How is the Department of Education going to give guidance on anything? Wasn't it dismantled? First of all, not so bad looking yourself. But while Trump did order the Department of Education to be shut down in an attempt to, as he called it, improve education outcomes and empower parents, this was blocked by a federal judge. So instead, the DOE has just been slimmed down. Trump feels the department established in 1979 by President Jimmy Carter isn't improving education and that responsibility for schools should go back to the states. Others feel dismantling the DOE is too rash of a decision. In either case, something clearly needs to change, because assuming that if we keep doing what we've been doing for the past 20 years will somehow magically lead to better results, not even this guy would count on it. Speaking of changes being made to departments, the Department of Defense being changed back to the Department of War. And Democrats were thrilled. After all, they're very supportive of transitioning and identifying with the new name. It also seems they prefer socialism. More on that after the break. Unless we're demonetized again, then you'll just see a brief black screen. Welcome back, I hope. A new Gallup poll shows what Americans think about socialism and capitalism. Unsurprisingly, Republicans are heavily in favor of capitalism and not big fans of socialism. Makes sense. After all, Trump loves capitalism so much, he capitalizes every letter. But this poll showed that only 42% of Democrats view capitalism favorably, while 66% have a positive view of socialism. This is part of a 15-year trend of Democrats viewing capitalism more negatively while softening up to and even beginning to support socialism, which explains why self-described Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani won the New York City mayoral Democratic primary over Andrew Cuomo. With New York City being so heavily Democratic, it's quite possible it'll get a socialist mayor and operate as an experiment for how socialism works out for citizens. Spoiler, not so hot historically. Then again, I wouldn't expect younger voters coming out of the U.S. education system to have the strongest grasp on history or basic human decency. Speaking of systems that scare people, Sharia law. An Islamic group protesting the selling of alcohol, gambling tickets, and pork in Houston shops has gone viral, and many are concerned that they're trying to spread Sharia law in Texas.
We're going to be visiting all of the stores in the neighborhood, particularly the inner city neighborhoods where the religion of Islam is ignored.
In response to this, Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he previously signed laws that ban Sharia law in Texas and that storekeepers should report this type of action to authorities. Now it's worth noting, the group isn't trying to force Sharia law on everyone. Led by a black Islamist imam, they're just asking Muslim owners of stores in the area to adhere to Islamic principles, while giving repeated notices that they must stop selling the products or leave the area by a certain time or face protests, which doesn't sound like a threat. Earlier this week, I covered the stabbing death of Irina Zarutska, which now feels like it happened a year ago. This is a bad week, but it's a story left-leaning media wanted to touch as much as slugs want to touch soy sauce-soaked salt licks. Thankfully, with the story becoming so large it could no longer be ignored, CNN finally discussed it and identified the true villain, Charlie Kirk.
People like Charlie Kirk, Van, they've been looking for opportunities to make this some sort of like reciprocal George Floyd situation. And that's the part that I think he's almost giving away the game. And it's sad to see a lot of people going along with it.
That aged about as well as milk on the surface of Mercury. Look, people posting white squares in their profile pics is just as cringy as when people were posting black squares. And this situation did bring out some very ugly reactions, with some people blaming Rosa Parks. But given their history and coverage of the Summer of Love, CNN is the last place that should be accusing someone of spinning racial narratives. And taking race out of the equation, which I know is difficult for the media, especially when their style guide says to lowercase the word white and capitalize the word black, I think people are allowed to be outraged that a woman fleeing a war-torn country was murdered on a U.S. public transit by a schizophrenic that had been arrested 14 times, who authorities should have known needed to be separated from the public. That's not an offensive opinion, is it? By asking that, I'm not setting myself up for an infuriating clip that shows CNN is somehow outraged by this notion, am I?
He demonstrated violent proclivities repeatedly.
You said he should be locked away for life for schizophrenia. That is what you said.
He should be institutionalized. Yes, and if you're saying he should...
Sauntered right into that one. President Trump weighed in and called Zarutska's killer, DeCarlos Brown Jr., an animal that should get the death penalty. And I'm sure that angry reaction is going to lead to its own angry reactions, which will lead to even more angry reactions, on and on until we're all mercifully dead. I'd like to think we can all acknowledge this was tragic and a failure of the system. And had authorities listened to Brown's own mother, who was pleading for them to lock him up before he hurt someone, this could have been prevented. Between this and Charlie Kirk's assassination, I wish we could put humanity first before politics and upholding narratives. Not to make a pun, but I hope this can be a turning point for America, where we start seeing each other first and foremost as human beings. But sadly, not even this guy would count on it. But what do you think? Leave your comments below with that American flag emoji. And before you go, check out this video recommended by the algorithm, the wise, benevolent, and, if it were a person, likely handsome algorithm. And again, I'm definitely not saying this under duress. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thank you for watching America Uncovered.